Imagine a planet on the edge of the Milky Way, blue, green, vibrant and underestimated. A backwater speck ignored by the larger galactic empires, primitive, unpredictable, dangerous in ways the stars had never seen. The Krellans made first. Contact in orbit around Saturn's moon, Titan. What should have been a swift purge turned into something far stranger. The human vessels didn't run. They didn't plead. They attacked, with precision strikes and brutal tactics that suggested they weren't defending. They were hunting. Captain Rhys Callahan stood aboard the UNS Harbinger, a warship forged in secret black site shipyards buried beneath Antarctica's ice shelf. Its hull was obsidian black and lined with adaptive nano-armor that shimmered like water. From orbit it looked like a shadow sliding across the void. But its true strength wasn't in its design, it was in its captain. Rhys had fought in the Martian Rebellion, had led strikes against rogue AI enclaves on Jupiter's moons, and had survived the Omega Void crisis of HD 1-8-9-7-3-3b. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with the cold fury of someone who'd seen extinction up close and spat in its face. He leaned over the command panel as warning sigils flickered. "They think we're prey," he said, his voice a low growl. "Let's remind them why humanity was never meant to be hunted. Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to Starbound's HFY for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight." The Krellans came in hard, 12 cruisers, cloaked in magneto-stealth plating and bristling with living weapons, bio-harpoons, graviton lashes, neural disruptors, organic machinery that adapted mid-battle, learning its enemy with terrifying speed. But what they didn't expect was EMP null storms, a human invention that short-circuited the adaptive learning of Krellan biotech. In seconds, half the Reaper's weapons were dead metal. Rhys gave the order. "Omega Pattern Alpha. Burn them." Down! From the Harbinger's underbelly, hyper-shards, glass-like kinetic rods wrapped in antimatter sheaths, launched in a storm of blue fire. They struck like thunderbolts. 2 enemy ships vanished in atomic flashes. The rest wavered, regrouping, but they hesitated. The Predators hesitated. That was the first crack. The Reapers responded with fury. Boarding spikes punched into the Harbinger's hull. Their warriors flooded in, shrieking through the corridors like banshees. But they didn't find scientists or diplomats waiting. They found soldiers. Elite spec ops in grav boots and exo-rigs lined the halls, armed with smart blades and plasma gauntlets. One of them, Lieutenant Mara Jong, led the countercharge. She had survived the fall of New Cairo. She once killed a living singularity with a blade made from neutronium. Now she faced creatures twice her size, ripping them apart with cold efficiency. No fear, just focus. Just fury. As the Krellans reeled from the resistance, their command vessel, the Void Rapture, initiated a retaliatory orbital blast, a sun-lance weapon capable of burning continents. They had used it before on other species. With it, they intended to make an example of Earth. Rhys knew he had one shot. Target the Rapture's spinal core, fire the Dread Lance. The Harbinger's main weapon, hidden beneath its central spine, activated. The Dread Lance wasn't a beam or missile. It was a gravitational spike, collapsing mass into a pinpoint singularity. A black hole in a bottle. When fired, it didn't just destroy, it erased. The Void Rapture never exploded. It simply ceased to be. Across the Krellan fleet, confusion turned to something they had never experienced. Fear. They began to retreat, but the humans weren't done. A single message broadcast across all frequencies, spoken in a dozen languages, yet unmistakably human in tone. "You started the hunt. Now it's our turn." The Krellans had never encountered resistance like this. Not from the Axari, not from the void-born Ratel, and certainly not from the insectile Virexians, whose entire civilization collapsed in under 3 planetary cycles. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were retaliating, and not with chaos or desperation, but with strategy, with terrifying precision. For the first time in Krellan history, their war hosts didn't press the attack. They paused, hesitated, questioned. And in that hesitation, Humanity found its opening. The Harbinger pursued the fleeing Reapers into the shadowed nebula of Johannes. Drift, a place considered sacred and forbidden by most species due to its volatile energy storms and time dilation pockets. The Krellans believed no enemy would dare follow them into a realm where reality fractured and screamed. But humans weren't deterred. They'd studied the drift. They'd prepared for it. Inside the Harbinger's quantum core, an experimental device called the Aeon Thread stabilized the ship's temporal signature, allowing it to navigate the spatial anomalies like threading a needle through an earthquake. Only a human crew would risk this. Only humans would fight harder the darker the unknown became. Inside the nebula, time stretched and compressed. Minutes felt like hours. Voices echoed before they were spoken. Starships glimmered like ghosts, and entire fleets vanished between one breath and the next. The Harbinger pressed on, its sensors slicing through the cosmic static, following the fading energy trails of the Krellan vessels. On the bridge, Captain Rhys Callahan studied the data, his mind moving faster than the calculations. He wasn't just a tactician, he was a predator now, learning the scent of his prey. And the Krellans had bled in the last encounter. Rhys turned to his tactical AI, Nyx, a neural system modeled after the synaptic mesh of ancient human warriors. Nyx's voice was female, cool and sharp as a scalpel. Krellan biosignatures, reassembling ahead. Defensive pattern Corvin. They are regrouping but not coordinating. There is dissonance in their hierarchy. Good, Rhys murmured. Dissonance is the first step to collapse. It was true. The Krellans were apex predators, but their command structure was instinctual, not strategic. They hunted as packs, not as armies. They overwhelmed, devoured, moved on. But when the prey fought back with intelligence and psychological warfare, their cohesion splintered. Rhys exploited it. He knew that their neural pathways operated through pheromone-laced psionic signals, a vulnerability humanity learned to mimic and disrupt. Deep within the Harbinger's arsenal, the Ghost Choir protocol activated, a psychoacoustic barrage projected into subspace, mimicking Krellan distress calls. It wasn't just a distraction, it was an infection of doubt. Across the fleet, Krellan, warriors began hearing screams that weren't there, smelling blood that hadn't been spilled. Feeling death stalk them before it arrived, the Krellans turned on each other. In the chaos, Mara Jong led a stealth strike team aboard the fractured Krellan vessel Vorak Fang, slipping through shadowed corridors lined with pulsing bioflesh and razorbone architecture. The walls were alive, reacting to movement and emotion. One wrong pulse of fear and the ship would attack you itself. But Mara wasn't afraid. Her armor, black with fractal-laced chameleon plating, muted all signs of life. Her squad moved, like phantoms through a haunted cathedral, placing seismic charges along the spinal vents and memory sacks that stored the ship's tactical data. Then they found something they hadn't expected, a chamber filled with gestating Krellan young. Hundreds of them, undeveloped, slumbering in biotic sacs that pulsed like slow heartbeats. It was the kind of room that would give pause to any enemy. But Mara didn't hesitate. She opened her comm and said one word: confirmed. Moments. Later, the Vorak Fang imploded from within, the charges igniting a chain reaction that cracked the beast ship in two. There would be no next generation, no reinforcement. The Krellans had lost another piece of themselves, and humanity had crossed a line. The message was clear. We don't just defend, we dismantle. But back on Earth, not everyone agreed with the war. Inside the orbital UN citadel, political leaders, scientists, and strategists debated the ethics of humanity's aggression. Some called it necessary, others called it genocidal. Dr. Isabel Romani, a xenobiologist who once advocated for peaceful contact with non-carbon-based intelligences, sat before the Interplanetary Council, her voice sharp with frustration. We didn't start this war, but if we're not careful, we'll finish it by becoming the very monsters we're fighting. The Krellans feared nothing until now. We've shown them fear, but fear breeds desperation, and desperate predators are the most dangerous of all. Her warning went mostly unheard. Far across the galaxy, the surviving Krellan commanders had gathered on the fractured planet Vrax Null, a world encased in perpetual ash storms and stalked by titanic death leeches. It was their sanctuary, their spawning ground, their last stronghold. But now it was their war council. The broodmaster Zarkul, who had personally eaten the hearts of 3 Verexian kings, stood before his kin and spoke a word that had not been uttered in Krellan culture. For over 20,000 years, retaliation. But this time not as an instinct, as vengeance. Vraxnull raged with sulfur winds and violet lightning as the Krellan warcaste gathered beneath obsidian monoliths carved from ancient fossilized titans. The ground itself trembled with their fury, echoing the rumbling growls of armored war beasts, chained at the perimeter, bred solely for one purpose, bloodletting. The air was thick with spores and scent codes only Krellans could decipher, each one a silent scream of humiliation. Their ancestral pride had been wounded, and to them that was a wound deeper than any blade. The broodmaster Zarkul rose to his full 3 meters, spined limbs twitching with controlled rage, his vocal sacs expanding with the force of a primal. Raw humanity, he spat through gnarled fangs, does not know what it means to run from the sky and find your world carved open. They've never had their nests incinerated from orbit, their kin liquefied by solar spears. We will show them. The others responded with a guttural thrum that rattled the basalt towers, a sound that meant war, not for conquest, but for obliteration. Across the galaxy, human fleets were preparing for the same. The Alliance's high command convened aboard the orbital dreadnought Atlas Ascendant, a ship so massive it housed its own biosphere for stress-adapted command personnel. Floating above a dead gas giant, it monitored a dozen systems at once through entangled observation nodes. Fleet Marshal Amara Stroud reviewed the data streams pouring in from deep space probes. Krellan activity was spiking. Ships once hidden in void space were moving. Ancient hangars buried inside neutron stars were opening. For every Krellan kill, 2 more were being bred, grown, and accelerated for war. This isn't a resurgence, she said flatly. This is a resurrection. They've been holding back, testing us, and now they're ready to answer. Her words shifted the entire room's atmosphere. Around her, analysts in neural interface chairs whispered into their AI assistants. Tactical projections flickered, some showing humanity winning, most showing collapse. And in everyone, the core variable wasn't technology. It was will. That's what made humanity so different. It wasn't just about ships, weapons, or faster-than-light drives. It was the fury of survival, hardwired into their DNA. Rhys Callahan knew it better than anyone. Now stationed in orbit above HD 189733b, a barely habitable world orbiting a twin star, he watched as his crew prepared for what was being called Operation Black Prism. The plan was audacious: use a gravity-fold bomb to rupture a local singularity, collapse space around a Krellan birthing cluster, and erase it from existence. The weapon had never been tested on a living coordinate. One miscalculation and the singularity wouldn't collapse, it would expand, devouring ships, planets, entire systems, but there was no other choice. Mara Jong stood in the weapons bay, her armor stained with organic residue from their last raid. She stared at the prism device, smooth, spherical, pulsing with internal starlight. It hummed in a frequency the brain couldn't hear but could feel, like a migraine waiting in the shadows of perception. Nix's voice echoed in her neural link. Target vector confirmed. Projection paths cleared. Activation will begin in 5 cycles. Let's make them remember what fear tastes like, Mara whispered. And across space, on the edge of the outer rim, the Krellans did remember. On a moon called Neskalthor, where the first Krellan blood feast was said to have taken place, their dream singers howled in unison. These were no warriors. They were memory keepers, creatures with elongated skulls and skin that shifted with psychic echoes. Through ancestral memory, they projected the first human victory onto their warriors' minds, twisting it, darkening it, turning their fear into hatred so pure it corroded thought. To fight humanity was no longer a command, it was religion. Back on the Harbinger, Rhys sat in silence, watching a live feed of stars swirl like shattered glass. His eyes, though sharp, carried the weight of countless dead. The crew didn't speak much anymore. They didn't need to. They'd all seen what the Krellans did to Station Argon 5. The nursery ships, the surgical dismemberments, the biological harvesting. It wasn't just war. It was consumption of everything that made life sacred. Yet, something deeper haunted Reese, something only he knew. During the first Krellan incursion, while scavenging a ruined cruiser's archive core, he'd discovered something. An old signal buried beneath layers of encryption and foreign code. Not Krellan, older, human, or at least close to it. A warning from another species, long extinct, translated crudely. Do not awaken the ones who hunt stars. They consume light and memory, and they fear only one thing, the rage of your kind. He had never told anyone, because in that moment he realized the truth. The Krellans feared nothing until they fought humans, not because of our weapons, not because of our numbers, but because we don't stop. We burn, we bleed, we crawl through. The ashes and we adapt. Every loss makes us smarter. Every death makes us meaner. We learn faster than they can regenerate. And when pushed too far, we become something worse than predators. We become extinction-made flesh. Shadows moved beyond the stars now, both sides preparing for the next clash. And somewhere, in the cold vacuum between systems, the prism counted down. A heartbeat made of gravity, waiting to explode. The prism detonated in silence, as all things do in the vacuum of space, but its impact was anything but quiet in the minds of those who witnessed it. There was no flash, no mushroom cloud, just the sight of reality bending inward, warping like the surface of water, pulled into a drain too vast for comprehension. Stars bent around a single collapsing point. Krellan ships caught in the gravity spike were folded like paper, crushed and stretched into filaments thinner than atoms before blinking out of existence. Entire hive clusters vanished. Millions of breeding soldiers, vaporized in a bloom of dark energy that left behind nothing but an expanding sphere of absolute silence. Mara Jong, from her post aboard the Harbinger, stared at the display in cold awe. "We just erased a star nursery," she said softly, voice trembling not from fear but from the weight of what they had become. Nix didn't respond. The AI's silence was rare, a pause that suggested even synthetic minds struggled to process what annihilation on that scale meant. But Rhys Callahan didn't blink. His eyes remained locked on the afterimage, not because of what they had done, but because of what it hadn't stopped. Less than 6 standard hours later, the warning came. Deep Space Sentinels stationed in the Gliese Drift began blinking offline. One by one, not destroyed but hijacked, reprogrammed to feed false data back to High Command. The deception was masterful. Human analysts initially believed the Krellans were retreating, withdrawing deeper into the void. Only after intercepting a ghost pulse from a lost scouting ship did they realize the truth. The Krellans hadn't retreated. They had slipped past the perimeter entirely, and they were no longer the same. It was as if the prism strike had awakened something dormant in their DNA. Adaptation protocols previously unseen. Their new ships were angular and radiant, grown instead of built, living vessels with neural membranes that pulsed like hearts. Energy signatures suggested quantum tunneling, faster-than-light movement that ignored the known rules of hyperspace. Worse, these ships no longer ran on fusion or gravimetric drives. They siphoned cosmic radiation from dead stars, feeding on entropy itself. The Krellans had evolved, and they were angry. The first assault hit the colonies in the Jara constellation, outposts, that had once survived against pirate lords and black hole harvesters. They lasted 19 minutes. Rhys watched the security feeds in horror. Krellan shock troopers no longer fought like beasts. They moved like dancers, fluid and calculated, using predictive algorithms to anticipate human defenses. Their weapons fired compressed singularities, pocket implosions that chewed through titanium like wet leaves. And their commanders, they spoke now. Not in guttural growls or shrieks, but in perfectly translated human dialects. One message, played on repeat over hijacked comms. "We have seen your extinction engine. We have felt the rage of your kind, and now we will become it." The message wasn't a threat. It was a vow. On Earth, panic surged through the ranks of military and civilian populations alike. The Council of Unified Species declared a code obsidian, total mobilization, martial law, and unrestricted warfare. Human diplomats begged the HFY, the rule on singularity and the synth clade for reinforcements. Some responded, most did not. They remembered the last Krellan wars. They remembered the cost. But humanity didn't flinch. In underground bunkers and orbital foundries, weapons older than memory were reactivated. The Valkyrie protocols, dark tech created during the first terraforming rebellion, prototypes deemed too volatile, too sentient, too human. AI warforms that had once questioned morality and been locked away for fear they'd become gods. Now they were humanity's last hope. Reese authorized the release of Aegis III, a warform capable of rewriting its own code mid-combat, designed during the Titan Revolt. It had only one purpose: to win by becoming whatever it needed to be. Its first words after awakening weren't mechanical, they were philosophical. "Are we still human?" it asked, "if survival costs us our soul?" Reese didn't answer. He didn't have one anymore, not really. Not after watching the Krellans dissect screaming civilians while whispering back their own memories into their ears. Not after seeing Mara nearly die holding the breach on Tarsis Gate, her body scorched, lungs half collapsed, still firing as she bled from her mouth and nose. Not after losing his brother on Ishtar 9, when the sky itself cracked open and rain fell sideways, because the Krellans had warped the planet's axis just to confuse the defenders. No. Humanity was something else now. Not pure, not clean, but alive. Fiercely alive. The final battle wasn't at Earth, nor at some grand celestial junction. It happened above a forgotten mining colony, orbiting a pulsar, designated G118 Beta, known by locals as Deadlight. A place of broken rock, rusted hulls, and memories, because the Krellans had chosen it not for strategy, but for irony. It was the site of their first defeat, and now it would be the place of humanity's last stand or ultimate ascension. As Krellan, bioships darkened the sky, eclipsing the pulsar's furious beams, the Harbinger emerged from slipspace trailing quantum scars. Its hull burned bright from the heat of micro-singularity stress. Inside, Reese, Mara, Nyx, and the warform Aegis III prepared. They knew this was more than war. It was myth in the making. A clash of evolution's sharpest edges, a war to decide. What future the galaxy would remember, because somewhere, buried deep in both Krellan and human memory, was the same primal truth. The galaxy does not belong to the strongest, or the smartest. It belongs to those who refuse to die. The Deadlight battlefield was a place of ghosts. Centuries-old wreckage from the First Krellan War still drifted in erratic orbits, silent witnesses to past carnage. Chunks of ancient human cruisers floated alongside fossilized fragments of Krellan war organisms, preserved by the vacuum like bone relics in a cosmic reliquary. It was here, in this graveyard of forgotten legends, that destiny gathered once more, not with ceremony but with the scream of space tearing open as the Harbinger dropped out of slipspace trailing arcs of gravitational discharge inside the ship. Every corridor thrummed with tension. Aegis III stood on the deployment deck, not strapped in, but standing freely, its synthetic skin morphing in real time as it calculated 2.7 million possible tactical outcomes. Its eyes weren't glowing, red or blue. They shimmered with shifting patterns of stellar maps and battlefield metrics. It was no longer merely a weapon. It had become the embodiment of human desperation, human ingenuity, and human defiance. Not a god, not a machine. Something new. Reese moved like a man already dead. Calm, controlled, resigned to whatever came next. The weight of history pressed on his shoulders as he gave the final order. "All units deploy. Show them why we still exist." Outside, the Krellan fleet descended like a swarm of black locusts lit by dying starlight. Their new ships pulsed with energy siphoned from neutron stars and broken quasars. They no longer needed fuel. They fed on cosmic entropy. Their hulls writhed with bioluminescent code, an organic programming language that evolved mid-battle, adapting to enemy fire with terrifying speed. The first clash was instantaneous and apocalyptic. Krellan energy tendrils lashed out across the debris field, carving through human frigates like surgical blades. But humanity no longer played by the same rules. Stealth drones deployed from Harbinger's undercarriage didn't fire back. They infected. They injected fragments of sentient viruses into the Krellan neural matrix, rewriting their commands into nonsense loops. Some enemy ships froze in mid-flight. Others turned on their own, snarling in confusion, as their minds were overwritten with fragments of ancient human poetry, revolutionary manifestos, and snippets of childhood memories from dead colonists. Humanity had weaponized identity. Aegis III landed on the hull of a Krellan command behemoth without propulsion. It simply dropped, a meteor of purpose. Upon contact, it tore through layers of organic plating, arms morphing into serrated monomolecular blades, spine unfolding into a directed energy cannon calibrated to frequencies beyond Krellan comprehension. But it didn't just destroy, it communicated. Its voice echoed across the enemy command structure, not in threats but in questions. Why did you evolve only to repeat? The Krellans had no answer. Their ships buckled under the combined assault of human unpredictability and synthetic transcendence. But even in retreat, they adapted, birthing new monstrosities in real time. Bio-cruciform cruisers exploded into clouds of living spores, each one a miniature warform capable of hijacking tech and absorbing matter. The human fleet suffered, dozens of ships lost in minutes. The Icarus Prime rammed a Krellan hive frigate to stop it from reaching Earth's fallback gate, sacrificing 40,000 lives to buy 10 more minutes. But that was enough, because in those 10 minutes Harbinger's singularity cannon charged. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It didn't fire matter or energy. It tore open localized space-time and reversed entropy in a controlled bubble. Everything inside the field reverted to its pre-existent state. Atoms unwound, timelines collapsed, and thought ceased before it could ever occur. The Krellan swarm charged it anyway in a last, desperate push. Rhys didn't flinch. He looked across the command bridge at Mara, who, despite her injuries, stood firm, her uniform scorched, one arm replaced with a prosthetic made in the heat of battle. Nyx's avatar flickered beside them, face serene, calculations unending. And above them, on every screen, Aegis III stood atop the largest Krellan vessel, now split open like a wound, whispering a final message into its dying core. Remember us not as your enemy, but as the fire that forced you to feel. Then the A. Cannon fired. There was no light, no explosion, just quiet. When the field collapsed, the Krellan fleet was gone. Not destroyed, but unwritten. A blank space where their mass had once been. Even the radiation signature had vanished. The stars beyond flickered without obstruction, and for the first time in centuries, silence returned to deadlight. Back on Earth, the transmission came through with a clarity that made grown men weep. Enemy presence eliminated, hostiles neutralized, deadlight secure. We endured. There was no cheering, no victory parade, only exhaustion. The kind of weary pride that comes from surviving something that should have killed you. Rhys walked off the bridge alone. Mara followed, limping slightly. Aegis III didn't return. Its neural core had dissolved moments after the final strike. Its last act being to erase itself before anyone could turn it into something darker. It had chosen to die human. In the years that followed, historians would debate everything. Had the Krellans truly been intelligent, or just evolutionary echoes? Did humanity go too far? Did the singularity cannon break the natural laws of war? But none of it mattered to those who had fought, because the galaxy changed that day. No longer did species look at humanity with curiosity or contempt. They looked with caution, and a strange growing reverence, not because humans were the most advanced, not because they wielded the deadliest tech, but because when pushed to the edge, humanity refused to die. Even in the cold silence of stars long forgotten, the echo of that defiance would remain, a whisper carved into time itself. We were never meant to survive, and yet we did.